Hey guys, welcome back to Honey in the Rock episode 31. I'm Sophie and today I have Miss Elizabeth on.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming. So if you listened, one of the first episodes, her daughter was on Ella. You'll have to go back and listen to it, it was good. I think it was on friendship, and so that was her daughter, and so, but she's on today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming and for having me, both of them.
Yeah.
We were at the beach 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks, yeah.
For spring break. And when we were in the car ride, I was like, would you do this? And she's like, sure. I was like, okay, perfect, thanks.
I do anything for you, Sophie.
So, thank you. But now we're beach buddies. You know, I wish we were at the beach.
I know.
We
Please
were
spring
joking
break,
that we
come
would
back.
go to record at the beach, like on the ocean with the sand, but that didn't happen. So sorry if that's a disappointment. But just to roll right in, what is your testimony / story?
Well, I grew up in a home where my parents loved Jesus and they loved being a part of a church. And so we grew up, even though we moved a lot, my dad was in the military, so we were always kind of starting over every 2 to 3 years. But one of the first things we always did was get plugged into our next church.
Yeah.
And that was just a big part of my childhood, whether it was my parents or my grandparents. They were telling me the stories of the Bible and telling me of Jesus, and that was a huge impact on me. That was the greatest impact on me. And when I was a little girl, I prayed with my parents to receive Jesus. And I mean, it was very much a baby faith, but I think it was a genuine faith, and it was definitely like when I look back, what I remember, and that is just such a gift that through that time that impacted me, and that they were valued wanting to teach me those truths, and that was such roots for me in the gospel. I would say that there were 2 things that really kind of were growing my faith from like my parents' faith and then kind of sharing it with me to my faith. And that would be, I spent a summer in high school between my junior and senior year on a missions trip overseas and worked in an orphanage. And that was a very impactful summer for me. And that made me, it was kind of separate from my parents. I wanted to do it. I had to kind of fundraise and do this stuff, but it was just I made friendships that are still friends of mine today, so with a bunch of other teens. And I really saw God work in really powerful ways, take care of us in kind of crazy situations, and just to see his kingdom in a bigger picture than just like where I was here in America, even though I was moving around a lot. I think the other big thing would have been when I went to college and kind of, I remember when I was going to college and even thinking about my own children going to college, I have one in college, was kind of thinking about, okay, my parents aren't going to tell me I have to go to church, like I'm farther away from home. I was pretty far from home when I went to college, but the chance to invest in church and the chance to build friendships around Jesus, and those were really important things in my life, and my faith kind of being like my faith, and not like my parents driving me to church and checking in. I mean, they cared, they checked in, but you know what I mean.
Made it be on you.
Yeah, and those were really 4 years of a lot of spiritual growth because of the teaching I had. I was at a Christian college, and then also because of the friends I made. And those were really kind of my faith becoming my own and rooting down, and really helping me able to grow up. And those were really growing times for me personally.
That's really, I think that's when I've heard a lot of my friends who have now in college, it's like that's a big time for them to either be like step up and be like, yep, I want this, and go to church and like crave that relationship with Jesus. And then it's also where people might fall off and be like, oh, I gotta live and I gotta, do these things in these college years. And so I think that is like so true, like the vital years of that. And then going on that mission trip, I've heard a few stories, and it seems like so cool. And it being away from your parents, and like even the mission trips I've gone on, which haven't been super crazy, but just being away from my parents for a week and being in where I have to serve the whole time, it's like I'm doing this for a greater reason. I'm not just like doing this because it's like, oh, fun, yay. But it really was impactful, so thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
My next question is going to be about Matthew's story. So you have 3 kids. Your oldest is the same age as my oldest brother, and then your middle is one of my best friends, Ella, and then you have your youngest son, Matthew, and she's about to share some stories about her family and things they've walked through and journeys, but she has asked permission to share things, so don't worry, she's not invading privacy. But what is Matthew's story? And then after you share a little bit of that, we'll talk about how God's been faithful through that, and you can add that into.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Matthew, my youngest, was in kindergarten In May of kindergarten year, I'd been a very healthy, active, regular toddler, preschool years. But in kindergarten, he suddenly just started having some stuff like sleepiness, headaches, just wasn't feeling himself. He was losing some weight. And we went back and forth to the doctor really over a month time, and they kind of started with the simple things like, oh, it's a virus, and it kind of kept escalating. We ended up taking him in to the Greer ER and having a CT done because his eye, I noticed, started drifting, and that had been something they had just kind of said, if you see another symptom show up, then we can do a scan. But we were starting, I personally as mom was starting to kind of get kind of like, no, something big is wrong, and I was seeing him the most, and the doctors were just seeing him snippets. So I was the one that was kind of like, I think it's something bigger. So we did the CT scan, and 2 doctors came in and sat down with my husband and I, Matthew, and said, there is a tangerine-sized mass in the center of his brain, and so we needed to be moved to the main hospital here in Greenville so that he could have an MRI where they could tell more, and then we could kind of move from there as to diagnosing and figuring out options and treatment and things like that. And that was a really shocking moment, as you can imagine, and we were reeling. We had to make a lot of quick decisions, and I still remember stepping out of the room for a minute, and the ambulance driver was there getting ready to move us, and he looked at me and he says, Mom, are you ready? And I was kind of falling apart in the hallway, like not in front of Matthew, but falling apart. And it was kind of those people I feel like God put there that I needed that, there will be time to grieve, but like right now I am wearing my mom hat and Matthew's scared and he needs me to be on. And so that was a blessing that person was there to kind of remind me and so we moved to the hospital, and we went through a lot of people showing up for us in 24 hours and a lot of time frame of figuring out what type of tumor it was, and it's a low-grade brain tumor, which is a great thing, but it's very difficult to treat because of its location, and so ideally you do surgery. So what we started out was he had surgery that year at the end of kindergarten. And the surgery was able to get a certain amount of tumor out, but some had to stay because of the blood vessels that run through it. And so we then kind of had times of waiting, and then we also had to do other forms of treatment, like chemo and stuff like that. But his first surgery was in Atlanta, and it was pretty traumatic for all of us. And we were really blessed by a lot of friends and family that love Jesus that showed up in that waiting room with us and prayed with us and were just with us. And those are like days you never forget and times you never forget. And we were blessed with great doctors and nurses, and everything didn't always go smoothly, but we had excellent medical care, and we were really thankful for that. So that was a tremendous blessing for us. And then, like I said, it's been 9 years now. So he's done a lot of treatment. He's been in and out of the hospital with a variety of things. And then this past summer, we went back and did another surgery. It had been 7 years since his last surgery, and the doctors had recommended it, and so we did another surgery, same doctor in Atlanta, and then he did some proton beam radiation in Atlanta for 6 weeks, which had its own challenges because that was the first time we were separated as a family, and he was older. Everybody was older. It felt different. For my other kids, a lot of things happened around them that they weren't really understanding at this time. They were like personally experiencing it, which was a blessing. I feel like for them it really strengthened their faith because they were loved by their friends like you, and they really were prayed over and really saw God work in ways. But we're still kind of in a weird watching and waiting with his tumor overall.
I think this summer was like super eye-opening for me to be like a witness of it all, to see your strength of this is what we got to do, this is what's best for him and the family, and then like also seeing his bravery and strength and like getting to know him more and more over the past like year or two has been like so cool to be like, this kid is so brave. But it's also been a blessing to be friends with Ella and see her point of view of it and learning how to walk this journey and how to like support somebody in such a hard time. Then what are some ways the Lord has been faithful in this journey?
Well, I think one of the things I've learned most through this journey is the faithfulness of the Lord. When Matthew was first diagnosed, I feel like we really were just praying for healing, and we still desire healing here on earth. And a lot of this is just out of our hands because of we just don't know how his tumor will respond to different things. But we have seen God's faithfulness even in not healing Matthew here on earth, but providing and taking care of him. And he has provided people to love us. He has provided just his presence, which is him drawing near to us. When Matthew was first diagnosed, my parents live up in northern Greenville County, and we went to their farm, and I looked out and I could see the mountains, and I was just kind of reeling. And
Right.
Psalm 121, 1 and 2 became really special to us.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of our friends made a big sheet and had handprints of his friends, and
That's
she
sweet.
painted it, which is, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth.
Mm.
And that has been something we go back to again and
Yeah.
again. And it's just been one of those gifts of reminders
Right.
that hard is not the absence of God's goodness,
No,
and
yeah.
goodness and mercy do follow us every day,
Mhm.
even when they're hard days.
Right.
And that's been a big impact for us to
Right.
kind of trust and to see that, like, we pictured this going a little differently. We didn't picture it being 9 years of
No.
like waiting for,
Right.
like, I mean, God has faithfully taken care of Matthew, but also waiting
Right.
for closure
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that situation.
That verse when our friend passed away, that just kept getting brought up. Our help comes from the Lord, and that's like so hopeful because we can try as humans, but like we're gonna fall short of that. But then when the creator of the universe is able to pick us up and help us and provide for us, it's like, okay, we can do it then.
Mhm.
Like he provides ultimate comfort and protection, which has like been very helpful, and so I like that verse a lot. And then like I'm assuming like obviously like so many days are like hard and like doubting
Mhm.
God's goodness and God's mercy and God's peace. But
Mhm.
then like in that you have to remind yourself of what God does say.
Mhm.
And like even though life right now isn't easy and the hardships are coming, but it will be made perfect one day in heaven. And so just like waiting on that. But I just like can't imagine some of those hard days with your little baby in the hospital, just like having hard questions. But it's really encouraging to see like if someone can go through something as hard as y'all have gone through and are going through and holding on to the faith, like that's so encouraging to the non-believers and even me, a believer, like to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was really also impactful for me, especially at the beginning, was I just felt, and I know you guys have had friends and you've gone through your own things where you feel these feelings and you feel like, am I not saying God loves me when I'm feeling really sad, or I'm doubting, or I'm
Right.
feeling why I don't understand what you're
Mhm.
doing, but he like you read the Psalms and that's clearly feelings are a part
Right.
of that, and he is faithful, and our
Right.
faith is not based on our feelings, thankfully,
Yeah.
and that we can take that to him, and he shows up and
Yeah.
meets us where we are and
Right.
loves us.
Right.
And I think that's that whole rooting down and why it's so important to know
Right.
who he is and
Yeah.
to read God's word and to build friendships with people,
Yeah.
because there will be times when there are storms
Right.
and it's
Right.
easy to like get caught up in those and not fix our eyes on
Right.
Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Actually, at the beach one night, we were like laying in these bunk beds and we were talking about, what is doubt, and is doubt the absence of faith, and like things like that, where it was just like cool to go deeper and to realize like, it's okay to have full faith in Jesus, but also have these doubts, because if your faith is bigger than your doubts, then you're not down in forever. But just like reminding goodness of God and like having verses memorized, or like I have verses in my car taped up, so it's like I can just look at it. Like I might not be able to memorize all the verses I need to know, but I can read them at least. And there are things that remind me of the goodness of God when you get that hard phone call or the bad news. So.
No, definitely. I know one of my other favorite Psalms I've loved is Psalm 61. I think it's verse 2, but he talks about when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And I think that, like, our hearts are times overwhelmed, and we have this rock that we can cling to, and I think that is a hopeful thing.
Right, and that really is kind of where this name of the podcast came from. It was like Honey in the Rock, like he's the rock and he's sweet, and it's to run to him, like run to Jesus when things are hard or good. And so I like that verse. I haven't heard that one in a while, but I like that. And speaking of verses being able to hold on to, what are some of those that you guys have been able to hold on to?
Like I said, Psalm 121 was especially personal to our family in Matthew's story, but a few others that have been really important is Lamentations 3, 22 and 23, which is the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And just that thought of like strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Like this is today. God calls me to live today. Like there's so many times about Matthew's story that I want to figure out the future, and that is not what I'm called to. I'm called to like trust God for today.
Yeah.
And he has been faithful to provide tender mercies every day. It just always is kind of a great reminder when we go through it. And the other one that's been, I think, really special to me is, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. And I just think hope is something that is grown through enduring things and perseverance and God is who grows it in us, and I do think it brings such joy and peace.
Right.
And it's been just this reminder of what He's building in us. Like you said, the immeasurable things that look to the future,
Right.
and aren't just about
Right.
now, but they are really important in now because we need hope because we haven't yet reached heaven. So that's just been kind of those verses have been very impactful for me in the day to day kind of walking.
And I liked what you were saying about we got to worry about today before we think about tomorrow kind of thing. Like, let's be strong for today. Let's get through today. Let's do this, because often like I'll catch myself like worrying about college or the future, this or that, and like all these things that I'm not in control of, and we're not promised tomorrow. So I need to be living right here today. You know, just trying to glorify God the most right now today, and it'll work out like how God has it planned for my life. And so that I feel like that's a super easy thing to do, to be like, oh no, this and this, but like we're not in control, and once we can start letting go of some of that control, which I realize I'm really bad at.
Oh yeah.
But when I start letting
Understand,
go
me
just
too.
a little bit of control, it's like, oh wait, this is actually freeing, because I realize I'm not in control. So I like that verse, and the mercies are new each morning. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming by, and thank you guys for listening and watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.